This video is intended to be a walkthrough of configuring Salesforce.com, SFDC, with QlikSense Enterprise on Qlik Cloud Services, QCS. This video will not be completely exhaustive, but will guide you through a straightforward, common configuration. Additional documentation on configuring QCS can be found on help.qlik.com. We are going to begin in the Setup section of Salesforce.com, and we happen to be in the Lightning experience. Please note, however, that you could just as well be in the Classic experience, and the integration would remain the same, though some of the navigation and the names of the sections will vary. Let's now search for Apps, then select App Manager, and now let's select New Connected App. Let's give that app a name, say Qlik Cloud Services, and then we'll leave the API name the same. I'll add a contact email, and then we're going to tick on Enable OAuth Settings, which will allow us to configure OIDC. We now need to enter our callback URL. This is going to be your full tenant URL followed by /login/callback. This is the URI in QCS that the response must be sent to. Now, let's select the Oauth Scopes that we need to allow. We will select and add Access Your Basic Information, which includes your ID, profile, email address, etc. And then we will select and add Allow Access to Your Unique Identifier, OpenID, which is required for OIDC authentication. Next, we'll select Configure ID Token and tick off the boxes for Include Standard Claims and Include Custom Attributes, as we are going to reference both standard and custom claims from the token. We can leave the rest as default and select Save, and then we'll see a notification that it could take between 2 and 10 minutes for the changes to take effect. So we'll hit Continue, and then we can see our new connected app. Let's now copy out our consumer key and save it somewhere securely. And then we're going to do the same with our consumer secret. So we'll select Click to Reveal, and we'll copy that as well. We can now scroll down to the bottom and see the Custom Attributes section. Here is where we'll be able to send the user ID, groups, and potentially other attributes that you'd like QCS to consume. So we'll select New. This part of the documentation is going to be specific to your organization, meaning what attribute is used for the distinct user ID in your system, what attribute you want to use for the display name, whether you want to send groups, which we do encourage, or whether you are going with a hybrid-based approach, in which case you need to confirm that your user directory matches the realm and that your user ID also matches the subject. In this video, our Qlik Cloud Services environment is going to be using the string SFDC as the realm and/or user directory, and the custom user attribute of Federation Identifier. You should use the user attribute that best aligns with your systems. Now we can begin to add our custom attributes. We will begin with the attribute that we want to use for our user ID. Let's call it user ID, and then select Insert Field. In this Salesforce system, we've decided to use the user attribute of Federation Identifier, which we use across all of our systems. So we'll scroll down to the user section and then select SAML Federation ID, which I know maps to that attribute. This will of course vary in your system, so please choose the appropriate unique identifier for the user here. We'll then select Insert, afterwards selecting Save. Now we can follow the same process for both the display name attribute and the groups attribute. So we'll select New again. And for the display name, let's name it Display Name. And we're going to create a composite field of the first name and last name fields. We can search for both, insert them, and then add an empty space between, but I happen to have this on my clipboard already. So I'm going to paste it in and then select Save. Lastly, let's add the group attribute. This is important because this attribute can be leveraged to control resource and access rights within Qlik Cloud Services. Let's give it the name Groups. And now we're going to use a custom attribute called Team, which contains the value of enterprise architects for this user that we're going to test with. You might end up using another field from role or profile perhaps, as it is up to where these values need to come from. We'll then insert that field, and lastly, select Save. We've completed the configuration of the connected app, and now we need to grant certain users in Salesforce permission to use it. For this demo, I'm going to allow access to the System Administrator's profile. You of course can control this at the profile level or via a permission set, and would grant the appropriate users access. So let's go ahead and search for Profile, and then we'll select Profiles. We'll navigate over to the appropriate profile by selecting S, so we can quickly find System Administrators. Now select that profile, and once there, we'll edit the connected apps. So go ahead and select Assigned Connected Apps. We'll select Edit. And then we need to select the connected app that we created. In this case, it is called Qlik Cloud Services. So we'll add that to the list, and then we'll select Save. The users with this profile now have access to leverage the connected app. We've now navigated to the Management Console in Qlik Cloud Services, where we can configure our identity provider. Before we do so, however, I'm going to first select Settings, and then toggle on Enable Dynamic Assignment for Professional Access, so that I can automatically assign professional access to my user from Salesforce as soon as he or she logs in. This is of course completely optional and can be done manually. I'm then going to select Enable Creation of Groups, so that I can leverage groups within the system. Back under Identity Provider, we can now select Create New. For the type, we're going to leave it as interactive, as this identity provider is going to be configured for user logins and not for machine-to-machine communication. Under the provider, we're then going to select Salesforce. Next, you'll need to paste in your Salesforce Discovery URL. This URL will vary depending on your Salesforce tenant, but should look something like the following. Next, we're now going to paste in our client ID that we saved from earlier, and then followed by our client secret. And the realm in this case is going to be SFDC, but again, this is up to you and your organization on what you want to name this. And then we're going to add the subject, the name, which is the display name, and the groups attributes, which are accessible under /custom_attributes/ whatever you named your attribute inside of Salesforce. Keep in mind here that the subject refers to the user ID. We can now leave the remainders as default and then select Create. This will give us a warning that we can only have a singular interactive IDP. We'll hit Save. And then we can log in to Salesforce. And now what we're doing is we're allowing Salesforce access to those two scopes that we assigned earlier. And we'll select Allow. And we could see a success with all of the responses. So I can see that my groups has passed along enterprise architects. I can see that my display name is my first space last name. And at the bottom, I can see that my subject is SFDC/DPI, which is my SAML federated ID. We'll select Go Back to Management Console. And then we can flip our identity provider to active. After doing so, we can then test logging in to Qlik Cloud Services in a brand new browser. We get redirected over to Salesforce, where I'm now going to log in. And you can see that I've now successfully logged in, and I have actually been automatically granted a professional license. So now I'm going to go over to the management console, select license, view assigned users, and I can confirm the IDP subject. You've now successfully configured Salesforce.com as an IDP for QCS.